Sometimes the biggest political earthquakes don't come from shouting scandals or breaking news alerts. Sometimes they come from a single sentence, spoken softly, casually, almost unintentionally. And yet, in that small moment, the entire facade cracks open. That's exactly what happened when Attorney General Pam Bondi sat in front of the House Oversight Committee, expecting a predictable line of questioning about grant funding, cybersecurity budgets, and departmental priorities. She came ready with talking points, with polished rhetoric, with the confidence that she could steer the hearing the way she wanted. But Congressman Frank Mrvan did something far more dangerous to her than a partisan attack. He stayed calm. He stayed polite. He stayed methodical. And because of that, Bondi never saw the trap until she stepped right into it. The moment began innocently, almost mundanely. Mrvan spoke about law enforcement funding in his district, Northwest Indiana. He spoke about the federal grants he'd helped deliver to cities like Gary, East Chicago, and Michigan City. These weren't ideological issues. These weren't political grenades. They were just normal oversight questions, the kind any attorney general should be comfortable answering. And Bondi was. She handled them smoothly. Yes, Congressman, that funding will remain where it is, she reassured him. We want to protect Haida. Her tone was confident, steady, polished. The kind of tone you get from someone who believes they're in complete control. She walked through her cybersecurity numbers, too, citing $50 million for cyber protections, even calling it one big, beautiful bill. She defended the budget, acknowledged threats from Iran and China, and promised to get him more detailed information. It was a typical Washington performance, clean, rehearsed, and safe. But Congressman Mrvan was not there for performance. He was there for answers. And when he pivoted to the real question, the one that would unravel Bondi's composure, the temperature in the room shifted almost instantly. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it. He asked about something simple, yet profoundly serious, an internal DOJ email directive that had been sent out to FBI agents. This email asked agents to send in weekly reports. Specifically, 5 reasons why they did what they did that week, what cases they were working on, what tasks they were handling, why they made certain decisions. Normally, this kind of reporting would be handled entirely within the FBI's internal structure, not from DOJ political leadership, and certainly not in a way that might expose sensitive investigative information. The kicker? FBI Director Patel had already testified on it earlier. First, he denied such an email existed. Then, under pressure, he admitted it came from DOJ. Then he admitted he told his agents not to comply. That contradiction alone was alarming, but what was coming next was far more explosive. Mrvan asked Bondi, calmly, politely, directly, who sent this directive, why it was issued, where the responses went, because FBI agents are not retail employees submitting end-of-shift notes. These are federal investigators working on matters that often involve national security, counterintelligence, and classified operations. If they were sending weekly updates to an unexplained DOJ inbox, that was a problem so big that it should have triggered red alarms across every department. And that's when Bondi slipped. The kind of slip no attorney general, left, right, or center, should ever make. When pressed on whether she sent the directive herself or knew it was sent, she said something that froze the entire room. I didn't realize it went to the FBI. Read that again. The Attorney General of the United States, who oversees the FBI, did not realize her own directive was sent to FBI agents. That is not a minor mistake. That is not a clerical error. That is not a miscommunication. That is an admission of one of 3 possibilities, all of them disastrous. 1, she lost control of her own staff, meaning directives can go out to the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country without her knowledge. 2, she knew what the directive was but didn't want to take responsibility for it, meaning she is trying to distance herself from an order she now realizes looks extremely suspicious. 3, she is aware of the directive but pretending not to be, which raises even deeper questions, meaning someone inside DOJ is shaping FBI behavior without oversight. Whichever interpretation you choose, none are acceptable. And Congressman Mrvan, sensing the significance of her slip, didn't waste a second. He leaned into the gap. He asked the obvious follow-up. If this email came from your office and you didn't send it, who did? Bondi's answer made the situation even worse. She didn't name a person. She didn't identify a department. She didn't describe an internal process. She just said, my entire office. Her entire office? That's not an answer. That's a dodge. That's a muddy cloud of uncertainty meant to obscure rather than clarify. Because no serious government directive, especially one instructing FBI agents to report their weekly activities, comes from the entire office. Directives like that have names attached. They have chains of command. They have authors, approvers, distribution lists, justification memos, and oversight logs. But here, nothing. Bondi had no name to give, no explanation, no detail, just a vague wave in the direction of her staff. Then came the final blow, Mrvan's most important question. If some FBI agents did respond to this directive, where did their data go? Who stored it? How was it protected? Who accessed it? Bondi had no answer. She didn't know. She could only say, I will find out. And in that moment, the carefully polished facade shattered, because what she was admitting, intentionally or not, was that the U.S. Department of Justice might have been collecting sensitive agent-level updates without even the Attorney General knowing where the information was going. Sensitive data that could include information on national security cases, counterintelligence operations, criminal investigations, ongoing surveillance, undercover activities. This wasn't a political talking point. This wasn't a rhetorical misstep. This was a structural failure. And Bondi's attempt to defend it by saying the directive was simply to make sure people were sitting at their desks and alive only made things worse. Alive? That's the explanation she went with. This wasn't a daycare center. This wasn't an office attendance form. This was the FBI. And that's when the real story began to emerge. Because Mrvan's calm, steady questioning didn't just expose a procedural error. It exposed something deeper. A DOJ leadership team that appears disorganized, chaotic, and shockingly unaware of what directives are being sent in its name. Bondi's confession wasn't loud, but it was seismic. And for anyone paying attention, it revealed far more than she intended. If Segment 1 captured the moment Pam Bondi slipped, Segment 2 reveals why that moment mattered so much, and why Congressman Frank Mrvan's approach was so devastating. Because what happened wasn't an accident. It wasn't luck. It was a tactical dismantling of an attorney general who believed she was in control of the room. The genius of Mrvan's method was subtle. He never raised his voice. He didn't posture or grandstand. He didn't deliver the kind of fiery speeches cable news pundits love to clip. Instead, he used something far more dangerous, discipline. Let's start at the beginning of that questioning exchange, because understanding his strategy makes Bondi's unraveling even clearer. When Mrvan began, he spoke about public safety officers, first responders, and federal grants. This is important. He built a comfort zone for Bondi, so she wouldn't expect what was coming next. By keeping her relaxed, keeping her talking, keeping her confident, he set the stage for the real question, the one she wasn't prepared to answer. He referenced the COPS grant program, the license plate reader systems, and technological investments his district previously depended on. These topics are procedural, not political. No attorney general is ever defensive about police funding. It's the safe zone of safe zones. Bondi leaned in comfortably. She reassured him about continued support. She confirmed knowledge of the Hyde district, even casually recalling it was in Merrillville. She was in full control, or at least she thought she was. Then came cybersecurity. Mrvan asked an entirely reasonable question. Did the new DOJ budget increase protections for America's digital infrastructure? With rising tensions from Iran, cyber attacks were becoming more frequent and more sophisticated. Even non-experts know that. Bondi, again, appeared confident. She referenced $50 million for cybersecurity, repeated it, reinforced it, and then tossed a strange phrase. The one big, beautiful bill. She spoke casually, almost too casually, as if she were presenting a product she already knew Congress was going to buy. She was ready for these questions. She had prepped for them. But then Mrvan shifted gears. He went from public safety to cyber to accountability. And that's where the tension began. He referenced FBI Director Patel's testimony from a previous hearing. Patel, when pressed, first denied that the controversial email directive existed. Then he amended his statement. Yes, it existed. Yes, DOJ sent it. And yes, he told agents not to comply. That alone should have raised alarms. Patel's inconsistency wasn't a small detail. It was a massive red flag that something inside DOJ was not functioning properly. But Mrvan wasn't using Patel's words to embarrass Bondi. He was doing something more strategic, establishing the timeline, the contradictions, the confusion inside DOJ, and then placing Bondi at the center of it. He asked her calmly, where did the directive come from? Who authorized it? Who sent it? How did it end up in the inboxes of FBI agents working on sensitive operations? Bondi initially gave the standard Washington answer. I asked that it be withdrawn. That line is a classic tool. It allows a political figure to seem responsible while disclaiming direct involvement. It's the modern-day version of mistakes were made. But Mrvan didn't let go. He pressed again. If it came from your office, who sent it? Bondi's answer? My office. That's it. No department. No official. No staffer. No division. No deputy. No chain of command. Just my office. Think about how absurd that answer is. If an FBI field office sends a directive to every police department in a state, it's documented. If a DHS division issues a security bulletin, it has an author. If a county clerk sends a memo, even that has a name on it. Yet somehow, the Attorney General of the United States tried to claim that no single identifiable person sent a directive to FBI agents. This wasn't just sloppy, it was suspicious. But what came next was worse. When Mrvan pushed, you're telling me you didn't send it, but it came from your office? Then who sent it? Bondi responded with a line that changed the entire hearing. I did realize it went to the FBI. There are moments in political testimony when you can feel the air get sucked out of the room. This was one of them. This wasn't a miscommunication. This wasn't a misphrasing. This was an admission of either incompetence or concealment, and neither explanation is acceptable for the nation's top law enforcement authority. Let's break down why that sentence was so devastating. 1. It proved she did not know what orders were being issued under her name. If true, this is a catastrophic management failure. 2. It proved she lost control of her department. Directives to the FBI cannot be issued by rogue staffers. 3. It suggested she knew about the directive but didn't want to take responsibility for its reach, which implies she might have understood the dangers but hoped to distance herself. 4. It directly contradicted basic oversight standards. No DOJ directive, especially one demanding operational details, should be sent without AG review. And Mrvan knew instantly what this meant. He didn't need to attack her. He didn't need to raise his voice. He simply asked the next question. If the people who responded complied, where did their information go? Bondi's answer? I'll get you that information. In other words, she had no idea. That means no documented retention system, no audit trail, no confirmation of deletion, no chain of custody, no cybersecurity assurances, no privacy protections. Imagine if an unauthorized directive prompted FBI agents to send information about active counterintelligence investigations into a black hole of DOJ servers. Who accessed it? Who read it? Was it stored securely? Was it leaked? Bondi had no answers. None. And here's where Mrvan's brilliance showed. He never accused her of wrongdoing. He didn't need to. She indicted herself through her own testimony. He simply allowed her to reveal the truth with her own words. The silence between his questions was more damaging than any speech he could have delivered, and Bondi's attempts to defend the directive only made matters worse. She insisted it was simply to make sure people were sitting at their desks and alive. That explanation might work for a fast food chain manager checking on shift workers, but not for the FBI, not for national security, not for federal law enforcement, not for a department entrusted with counterterrorism, cyber defense, and criminal justice. By the end of the exchange, Bondi looked less like an attorney general controlling a massive justice apparatus, and more like someone struggling to explain something she never expected to be asked about. Because this wasn't just a bureaucratic mistake. It was a structural failure inside DOJ, and Bondi had just admitted it, live on the record. Mrvan didn't expose her through aggression. He exposed her through clarity. And once her own words were out there, she couldn't take them back. In every major political scandal, there is a single moment, a sentence, a pause, a stumble, when everything changes, when the facade cracks, when the narrative collapses, when the truth stops hiding. For Pam Bondi, that moment wasn't a loud argument. It wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't even a heated exchange. It was a sentence delivered quietly, almost casually. I didn't realize it went to the FBI. You could feel the air pressure drop inside the hearing room. The cameras didn't need to zoom in. The reporters didn't need to exchange glances. Everyone listening understood instantly. The Attorney General had just admitted something she absolutely should not have admitted. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a break in the story, the kind of line journalists dream of, the kind of slip that reshapes hearings, rewrites headlines, and launches investigations. Let's peel back what happened in that exact moment, because this is where the scandal detonated. The shift, from routine to radioactive. Up until that point, the exchange between Representative Frank Mrvan and AG Bondi felt routine. Budget, funding, grants, cybersecurity. Nothing outside the predictable government script. Bondi had been gliding. Polished answers, clean rhetoric, confident tone. The kind of Washington performance that's been rehearsed, refined, and pre-approved. But Congressman Mrvan knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't here to spar. He wasn't here for sound bites. He was here to reveal something, and he had set the trap 3 questions earlier. He slowly steered the discussion toward the email directive, the mysterious internal DOJ instruction that had already caused headaches for FBI Director Patel, a directive that told FBI agents to report sensitive details, demanded weekly 5 reasons why breakdowns, was denied then admitted, was disowned by Patel, and now sat squarely on Bondi's desk. And then came the question, calm, clean, surgical. Who sent the email? Bondi tried the standard Washington sidestep. My office. Not good enough. But you didn't send it? Her answer, the moment that changed everything. I didn't realize it went to the FBI. It hit the room like a thunderclap. Why this sentence is a scandal. Because that one line means something catastrophic inside DOJ. 1. The Attorney General admits she didn't know what directives her own office was issuing. That alone is headline material. 2. Sensitive operational emails were sent to FBI agents without her knowledge. That's dangerous and possibly illegal. 3. She effectively conceded that DOJ may be acting without oversight. That is a crisis. 4. The nation's top law enforcement officer publicly said she was unaware of an internal command that directly touched federal investigations. That is a government malfunction. Think about what she admitted. This is a memo about cafeteria renovations. This isn't a holiday greeting card. This is a directive that could force FBI agents to reveal details about counterintelligence, national security threats, or ongoing criminal cases. And the Attorney General, the person responsible for every DOJ action, didn't realize it was sent? If a newsroom got that quote, they'd send it straight to the top of the teleprompter. Breaking. Attorney General says she did not know it was sent directed to FBI agents. That is scandal language. The follow-up that blew the door open. Mrvan didn't waste a millisecond. He knew the moment was hot, and he pressed right on the soft spot. If agents complied, where did the data go? This question wasn't just smart, it was lethal. Because here's the truth reporters know instantly. The where tells you everything, where the data is stored, who saw it, who handled it, who ordered it, who benefits from it. And Bondi? She had no answer. None. Not a department. Not a system. Not a protocol. Not a single clue. Just a weak, unsteady fallback. I will get you that information. In investigative journalism, we call that a collapse point, the moment when the official explanation no longer holds, and you can practically hear the story unravel. You could feel the temperature in the room shift. The members leaned in. The staffers stiffened up. Even Bondi's tone changed. Because when an AG can't tell Congress where internal DOJ requested FBI data went, that isn't a minor oversight. That's a potential security breach. That's a chain of custody nightmare. That's a crisis sitting in someone's inbox with no adult supervision. And this wasn't speculation. Bondi admitted she didn't know. For a DOJ that has branded itself as law and order, this was the worst possible storyline. Chaos inside the department. The defense that backfired. Bondi tried to recover. She tried to downplay the directive. It was simply to make sure people were at their desks and alive. Alive? That was her justification? In a hearing about national security and internal control failures, she reduced the entire scandal to, we just wanted to check if people were alive. This was not a defense. It was an implosion. No FBI agent needs a weekly 5 reasons why report to prove they survived Monday. No federal agency would demand sensitive case details just to confirm someone didn't choke on their breakfast. Her answer didn't calm anyone. It set off every alarm. If this were a newsroom moment, the cheering would read, AG Bondi claims controversial FBI directive was merely a wellness check. Lawmakers skeptical. Because the explanation is not credible. It's not logical. And it's not innocent. It sounded like a back-of-the-napkin excuse scribbled 5 minutes before showtime. The newsroom takeaway. When reporters cover hearings like this, they look for 3 things. A contradiction, a confession, a collapse of narrative. Bondi delivered all 3. The contradiction. Director Patel said it existed, then didn't, then did. The confession. Bondi didn't know it went to FBI agents. The collapse. She cannot explain where the sensitive data ended up. That's not just a political misstep. That's not just bad messaging. This is the kind of moment that fuels investigations, subpoenas, leaks, and full-scale political fires. A DOJ directive with no author, information with no destination, an attorney general with no explanation. This is not the end of the story. This is the ignition point. And everyone watching that hearing knew something inside DOJ is broken. And Pam Bondi just told the country. It begins with a tone that only seasoned reporters recognize. The shift from political drama into structural panic. Inside the nation's capital, the air had changed, not because of a headline, not because of a statement, but because of what wasn't being said. The silence between government agencies had grown thick. And in Washington, silence is never just silence. It is signal. And on that afternoon, every newsroom felt it. Producers stare at their incoming wires, reading and rereading the same few lines. Try to understand how something so procedural had become so volatile. Impeachment motion filed. Congressional floor, response pending. A simple update, but the reaction? Markets twitching, agencies freezing, spokespeople going dark. This wasn't normal. This was a pulse, and every experienced journalist knew to follow the pulse. Inside the investigative room, analysts began combing through messages, agency schedules, movement logs, press office cancellations, and then it clicked. Something was happening behind the scenes, something coordinated. A quiet shutdown spreading across departments that had no business going silent. And then the first leak arrived. A senior staffer from one of the committees, voice shaking but composed enough to hide it, said just 6 words. You should start checking internal memos. Not the typical no comment, not the usual deflection, a direction, a breadcrumb, a warning. Within minutes, investigative teams launched into action. Every newsroom, every political desk, every digital investigative unit, all quietly pulling the same thread. Because if multiple committees were locking communications at the same hour, someone had triggered a system-wide protocol. The question was, why? As reporters pushed further, patterns emerged. Staff were being instructed not to appear on live TV. Cabinet-level aides were canceling evening commitments. Lawyers were suddenly entering rooms that had nothing to do with them. The government's internal temperature had spiked. And then another leak. This time a message forwarded from a congressional aide. We are being advised to avoid discussing anything involving enforcement recommendations. Enforcement? Why enforcement? This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about the potential misuse of investigative authority. The very thing the Congresswoman had warned in her fiery response. The moment political motives begin creeping into the machinery of justice. That's when the newsroom alarms triggered. Because if certain agencies were quietly preparing for an escalation, the public was still being told everything was business as usual. But nothing about the moment felt usual. Insiders weren't panicked. Professionals never panic, but they were alert, sharp, functioning at a higher frequency. That's the kind of atmosphere that precedes major institutional stress. At the same time, digital analysts noticed something alarming, a spike in coordinated messaging, not from politicians, but from external groups attempting to spin the impeachment narrative into something explosive. Posts emerging in waves, bots amplifying selective quotes, foreign accounts pushing narratives within minutes. Someone, somewhere wanted chaos. And in the middle of this tension, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's earlier words began circulating like wildfire. We are supposed to be writing laws, not running our own trials. Those words, clipped into 30-second videos, now serve as counterweight against agitators demanding immediate action, immediate punishment, immediate escalation. The newsroom phones rang nonstop. Legislators' offices were issuing controlled statements. Strategists were whispering about legal overreach risk. Senior reporters were being summoned to off-record briefings with unusually high urgency. And then the breakthrough hit. A whistleblower, a verified one, reached out through an encrypted channel. Their message was simple, but devastatingly important. There was pressure from outside the legal process. Pressure that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't evidence of wrongdoing. That would come later. It wasn't a smoking gun, not yet. But it showed that the political fight had begun spreading into the institutional backbone of justice. This was why agencies were going silent. This was why internal memos were shifting language. This was why certain officials were suddenly unavailable. Because political warfare had crossed into procedural territory. From the newsroom perspective, this moment was no longer just a governance story. It had become a structural integrity story. A test of the system's ability to resist pressure, to maintain neutrality, to uphold due process despite political heat. Inside the country, social reactions were split. Some were calling for immediate removal, others insisting the process was weaponized. But the real battlefield was not public perception. It was inside the institutions whose legitimacy the country relied on. Every newsroom knows that once political battles begin shifting procedural gears, reversals become difficult. Systems are built slowly, patiently, over decades, but they can fracture in days, even hours, if pushed past their thresholds. And in that tense hour, reporters realized something chilling. The institutions weren't just responding to pressure. They were positioning themselves for what might come next. Contingency plans were being reviewed, back-channel meetings arranged. Security advisors quietly consulted, not because an outcome had been decided, but because the stakes were now far bigger than one impeachment motion. The entire question had become, can the system hold? Meanwhile, in the public arena, the rhetoric was intensifying. TV panels were split-screen shouting matches. Social media was turning into a battlefield of manipulated narratives. Commentators were framing the moment as the test of the century. But inside the newsroom, the investigative team stayed locked on the core truth. Where political power tries to bend legal authority, the system itself becomes a story. Every editor, every senior correspondent, every producer began preparing for possibility that the next 24 hours could reshape the country's political trajectory, not because of the impeachment itself, but because of how the institutions responded to it. And at that moment, with tensions reaching a breaking point, one thing became clear. If the nation was going to understand the truth, someone had to keep reporting without fear, without bias, without bending. Because in moments like these, the collapse of information is the collapse of democracy. And the newsroom wasn't about to let that happen. By the time dawn broke over Washington, the country had already entered a new psychological territory, the kind that only emerges when uncertainty becomes national currency. Nobody knew what would happen next, but everyone sensed that the next step would be historic. Newsrooms were still humming, running on caffeine and instincts. Lawmakers were arriving at the Capitol earlier than usual. Journalists were lining the corridors, microphones ready, questions sharpened like blades. Because this was no longer about political gamesmanship. This was about institutional survival. The investigative teams, who had spent the night dissecting leads, were preparing a coordinated morning briefing that would go national. For hours they had cross-checked whistleblower claims, verified internal memos, compared timelines, and built a picture, not complete, but undeniable enough to demand public answers. And then at 7:48 a.m., a government source sent a message that changed the entire tempo. Expect a statement. Something big. 2 minutes later, a second source. 4 minutes later, a third. None of them said what the statement would be, but every newsroom felt it like a tremor. Something was about to break. Across the country, morning shows paused their usual light segments. Markets opened jittery, reacting to rumors rather than facts. Analysts spoke in cautious tones. Security agencies privately updated their internal alert levels. Even foreign governments began requesting intelligence briefings. Because whatever was about to be announced, it wasn't small. At 8:32 a.m., the House Oversight Committee released the first official document. Not long, not detailed, but enough to confirm what investigators already suspected. Certain procedural safeguards may not have been fully adhered to. A review is underway. Those words, threaded together with bureaucratic politeness, detonated across the political landscape. Because in government language, that statement meant one thing. Something irregular had happened. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a verdict. But it was enough to validate every concern raised in the last 48 hours. From Jasmine Crockett's warning to the whistleblower's encrypted message to the newsroom's investigative threads. Immediately, reporters flooded committee chairs with calls. Press secretaries scrambled to compose controlled responses. Social media erupted, but none of it compared to what happened next. At 9:15 a.m., Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped in front of the cameras. There was no hesitation in her voice, no carefully manufactured pause, only a firm, clear articulation of why the country had reached this moment. This is not about political victory. It is not about personal ambition. It is about the integrity of the institutions that protect every American regardless of party identity or belief. Her words cut through the noise. Because she wasn't speaking like a politician. She was speaking like someone who understood that institutions survive only when people defend the principles behind them. And she wasn't alone. Other lawmakers, from both parties, began echoing similar concerns. Quietly at first, cautiously, but the cracks in political tribalism had begun widening. Because even those who disagreed on policy understood one shared truth. If political motives interfere with the justice system, the foundation cracks. Behind the scenes, investigative reporters pieced together new sequences of events. Emails that seemed unusual, meeting logs that hinted at external pressure, sudden shifts in procedural steps. Not solid enough to convict, but solid enough to demand scrutiny. News networks broke into live coverage. Anchor after anchor delivered the developing story. Congress confirms procedural irregularities. Review underway into enforcement recommendations. Whistleblower indicates external pressure. Legal teams preparing for hearings. The nation was watching. Meanwhile, the White House Communications Office held an emergency session. Staff rotated in and out of conference rooms, drafting responses, reviewing language. Every syllable mattered now. Because in moments of political instability, miscommunication is gasoline. At 10:40 a.m., the Attorney General appeared at the podium. The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. And the AG said, The Department of Justice will cooperate fully with congressional oversight. We have nothing to hide. But something about the delivery felt measured, controlled, almost overly deliberate. Reporters noticed it. Lawmakers noticed it. Viewers noticed it. For the first time in this entire escalating crisis, the Department of Justice seemed to acknowledge that the storm was real and that it had reached their doorstep. Within minutes, analysts were decoding the statement. Some argued it was standard protocol. Others believed it was a defensive maneuver. Others still sensed that the AG was preparing for a deeper inquiry. But the moment that defined the day came shortly after. A fourth message from a whistleblower, this time verifiable through committee staff, reached investigative journalists. There were discussions about timing. Timing of actions that should not have been influenced. Timing. That one word was enough to shift the entire narrative. Because timing is where political pressure often hides. Not in the decisions, but in when those decisions are pushed. And if timing had been influenced, then the entire system was under more threat than anyone had admitted publicly. By mid-afternoon, Congress announced a bipartisan oversight review. A rare moment, a powerful message. Because when institutions sense danger, they sometimes unite in ways politics never expects. Newsrooms pivoted. Analysts recalibrated. Markets steadied slightly, showing cautious optimism that oversight would restore structure. And throughout it all, the central message grew louder. This was not about a single impeachment motion, not about one politician, not about one party. This was about a fundamental question. Can American institutions withstand political heat without bending? As evening fell, investigative teams prepared for the next phase. Hearings, subpoenas, testimonies, documents, and a long process of uncovering how far the irregularities went. Journalists didn't celebrate. They didn't dramatize. They did what they always do in moments of national testing. They kept reporting. Because democracy doesn't collapse when institutions are stressed. It collapses when people stop shining light on the stress. And on this day, that light was brighter than ever.